కొంగందుకునే వంగి పూలే రంగా.
Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third day of the Hyderabad Literary Festival 2021. And the first session of the third day, we are delighted to have with us Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni to talk to us about her new novel, The Last Queen, and which I am told is already optioned for a movie. Chitra is an award-winning and best-selling author, poet, activist, and a teacher of writing. Her work has been published widely in magazines and anthologies, and her books have been translated into 29 languages. That is some achievement. Several of her works have been made into films and plays. Her last novel, The Forest of Enchantments, and a retelling of the Ramayana in Sita's voice, was a bestseller. Very happy to have you, Chitra, here, and we hope this 1 hour is going to be interesting. My colleague, Professor Vijay Kumar, will be doing the moderation of the conversation that follows here. All to both of you.
Thank you, Ajay. And please do remind us of the time because I'm sure we will get lose the track of time once we start talking. So yeah, maybe about 15 minutes before.
I will.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Chitra, and thank you once again from all of us for taking your time out and joining us this morning from Houston, where you live. And we are delighted to. It's a wonderful way to start the day with a session on your new novel, The Last Queen. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the novel that we are talking about. Beautifully produced and with a wonderful cover. This is the novel Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni, The Last Queen. Since Chitra, this is absolutely mint fresh. I think officially it was released only a couple of days ago, I think on 20th. And since not many of our viewers would be familiar with the novel because it's so fresh, so let us begin at the very beginning. Who is this last queen and what is her story? If you can briefly tell us, and then we can take it from there.
Definitely. Yes, I'm very excited because, as you have said, The Last Queen has just come out. It is my newest book, my baby, as it were. So I'm very excited to see how people will respond to it. And I certainly hope that they will enjoy the book. The story of The Last Queen is the story of Rani Jinda, and she is the wife of Maharaja Ranjit Singh of Punjab. And many of us know about Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and many of us also know about his son, Maharaja Dalip Singh, who was the last king of Punjab. And he was the kingdom was taken away from him when he was about 9 years old. It was wrongfully annexed by the British, even though it was a protectorate. So a lot is known about the father and about the son. But Maharani Jinda is kind of forgotten in history. Forgotten by history, as sometimes happens to women, that even though they do important things, their story is not told. And she was amazing. She was the queen regent when her son became king. He was only a little more than 6 years old at that point. She fought the nobles. She was very brave. She got the confidence of the army. She went and met with the Khalsa leaders. They called her mother of the Khalsa. She dispensed with the veil. She sat in open court, and she really helped to keep the kingdom together for as long as she could. And even after she was defeated and imprisoned by the British and sent far away into exile, what I love about her character is she never gave up. She never says, you know, this is it, I'm defeated. Till the last day, she resists. And I felt that there was so much for us to learn from her story, just her spirit, as well as the ups and downs of her life. Because unlike just about all the other queens of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and indeed queens of that day, she did not come from a noble family or a royal family. She was the daughter of the Killa's dog trainer. So you can imagine that she was really something special, not only for Maharaja Ranjit Singh to fall in love with him or with her, but for him to respect her so much that he made her into a queen, not a concubine, not anything else. She was the queen, and she was his final queen. He said to her, that is it, you know, you have fulfilled all of my wishes, desire, love. I don't want any other queens after you. So what a special person she must have been.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly her humble beginnings also make it that much more interesting, you know, from where she began and where she ended, you know, being the wife, being the Maharani of the greatest king of the Sikhs. And then she becomes the mother of a prince from whom the kingdom is taken away. Right,
Yes.
it's a remarkable, it's a great tragedy. You know, the entire journey of her life is so remarkable. But do tell us, how did you get interested in Punjab, or how did you get interested in Sikh history? It's very, I mean, if I may say this, it's very unusual for a Bengali to get interested in anything other than Bengal.
Well, you know, I had, of course, gone a little farther than Bengal when I wrote Palace of Illusions, which is about the Mahabharata, which is, you know, a pan-Indian text, and same with Forest of Enchantments about the Ramayana. Sita and Draupadi are pan-Indian characters. In fact, we would call them world characters of mythic proportions. But okay, so yes, I had no idea I was going to write this novel. I had no idea that I was actually going to write a historical novel. But I had been at a literature festival in Kolkata. We had been talking about this just before the show started. And I was going to do a presentation, and I walked into, you know, the open air auditorium, and just a little earlier so that I would be there in time. And the person speaking before me, the two of them who had co-authored a book called The Kohinoor. So William Dalrymple and Anita Anand were speaking. And as I walked in, I think this was fated. They had a screen where they were showing photos from the book, and they put on the screen at that moment this very photo, which is actually a painting, one of the few paintings of Rani Jinda that is available to us. And it was commissioned by her son not long before she died. She was ill already, and he loved her greatly, and he wanted that that painting. So when I saw that painting, and they were talking about how he had been separated from his mother by the British for many, many years, and she had been exiled, you know, she had been imprisoned, and then she escaped to Nepal, where she got asylum. And he had been kept in England for a long time, but finally he created this little story that he wanted to come to India for a tiger hunt. So the British said, oh, okay, you know, you can go for a tiger hunt. But immediately he contacted his mother. She came from Nepal. He came from England. They met in Kolkata. And that was the story that Anita Anand and William Dalrymple were telling, as that this picture, this painting was up on the screen. And when I heard that story, about that, that heartfelt tragedy of the mother being separated from her little son for so long, not knowing what's going to happen. Is she ever going to see him again? And when she sees him, part of the tragedy is that he's been anglicized by the British. He's been living in England. He's like they used to call him the Black Maharaja. So he was the Black Prince. They used to call him the Queen Victoria's Black Prince. So it's like they appropriated his identity completely. He lost his religion. He converted to Christianity under some pressure. And so when she sees all this and she sees that his hair has been cut, she is just so distressed. It was such a powerful emotional moment that I thought, this is a woman whose story is worth researching and seeing if I can make this into a novel. And indeed, that was the inspiration. I think she found me more than I found her. She found me.
I think this is what usually poets say, that when the entire poem began with an image, and the poem found their voice, etc. But it's interesting that for a novelist, the image of this painting set you off on this journey. Very interesting.
Yes, it's partly perhaps because I started my writing journey as a poet. So perhaps images have a particular power as far as I'm concerned. They really, this image just hit me because there is on her face, if you take a look at it, there is this bravery, this resignation, and yet she's strong. She's still strong. You can tell that she's been through a lot, but she's not the kind of person who's going to give up.
And she wasn't very old either. I think she died very young. I mean, 46 or 48 or something like that.
Yes. Actually, what happened is that the years in the British prisons, and she was in two, the second was worse than the first one, really ruined her health because they kept her under very bad conditions, hoping, I think, that she would just die and they would be rid of her, because even there, she was constantly trying to rouse her people. She was trying to get them to see what the British had done to them, how they had really illegally taken over Punjab. So she was a big thorn in their flesh.
You mentioned, for instance, your two earlier novels, but if I take you a little back even further, you began writing about fictional women. Let's say Mistress of Spices or Sisters of Heart and so on. And then you move to mythological women. And if I am not mistaken, this is your first entry into historical figures, right? So you have been...
This is my first adult historical novel. I have one for children called Victory Song, which is set around the independence movement. And the heroes in that are children, because children were a part, especially in Bengal, of the struggle for independence. They were spies. They were often spies for the adults because they could go where the adults couldn't go.
And they were also...
But this is my first novel for adults. That is
children also worked as couriers.
Yes, they did. They were great messengers.
Correct. Is there one running thread through your fictional women, your mythological women, and now your historical women? Is there something that connects all of them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what connects them all is that indomitable spirit. All of my women find themselves in situations of great difficulty at some point or another, but they have this indomitable spirit that says, I will not give up. So I think what my women, I hope the way my women can perhaps inspire readers, because all of us at some point in our lives, we will all be in difficulty, or we have been in difficulty. We can't control what comes at us. But in some way, these women say, okay, I can't control what happens to me, but my reaction to it, I can control. My response to it, I can control. I will not let someone else destroy my spirit. I will keep fighting the best I can. And I think that is the common thread. And
Yeah.
certainly very true about Jinda.
Correct. I was also, trying to connect it to the epigraph with which you begin the novel, that, until the lions have a historian, it's always the hunter's, triumph that is going to be celebrated. This is, of course, a well-known African proverb. You have, of course, quoted it from Achebe, I think, who said this in an interview. So I was wondering whether it is really that attempt to give agency to women that really
Yes.
connects, all your women characters, whether they are fictional or mythological or historical.
I think you've said it very well. It is to give agency to women. It is to give them their own voice. That's been a really big, a big project of mine, right away from Mistress of Spices, but especially in Palace of Illusions to give Draupadi her voice, in Forest of Enchantments to give Sita her voice, because I think these two very important mythological characters have been misunderstood or misrepresented in a very patriarchal way, where in the great story of the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, they are kind of pushed over to the side. They are sometimes seen as troublemakers in the case of Draupadi, or victims, passive victims in the case of Sita. So I definitely wanted to give them their own voice, because when we have our own voice, we definitely have agency. We can tell our own story. But this is doubly important for Jinda, because yes, it is very important for her to tell her own story. I felt it was important, but also because the British had already told a story about not only her, but about all of India, really.
Yeah.
About India, and how, their story was, look at us British people, how wonderful and amazing we are. And look at these Indians, no culture, can't do anything right. We came and we kind of saved them. We took Prince Dalip and we saved him. We made him into a Christian. So there's two things going on, right? Queen Rani Jinda herself is being maligned, but also our larger culture was greatly, greatly maligned by the British. And I'm hoping in this book to set some of that right.
But, when you are working with, mythology, you have mythology in a way doesn't belong to anyone. So you have that kind of freedom to kind of use your imagination to recreate something, etc. But when you move to history, it is much more specific, much more located in both time and space. So when you move from mythology to history, did it feel a bit? Did you feel a bit constrained, or does history become a constraint, or does it become a resource?
And that's a great question, because it becomes both. And to back up a little bit, even when I was writing The Palace of Illusions and Forest of Enchantments, I wanted to stay close to the original Mahabharata and the original Ramayana. So, I read and researched as carefully as I could Valmiki and Vyas, and also the Bengali Ramayana and Mahabharata, the Bengali Ramayana by Krittivas, and then the Mahabharata also by Kashiram Das. So those were my major sources. I tried not to go away from any of the major incidents. So where I wanted to be creative were the empty spaces. What was Sita thinking? What did she actually think when she first saw Ram? What was in her mind when she is in Ashokban, a prisoner of Ravan? What were those private moments when maybe she is with her sister Urmila and they're talking about something? So I felt that those were the places where I could really allow my imagination to go. And in the case of Rani Jinda, what was in some ways a problem became actually a resource for me, because so little is known of her life. Beyond the major incidents that happen, what was going on inside the Zanana, for instance? How did she relate to the other Ranis of the Zanana, who most of them would have hated her because, kennel keeper's daughter, now she's our equal. No, she's better because she's the king's favorite.
Correct.
And how would they have behaved? Things like that, we don't know. So I felt free to imagine, as long as I didn't change any of the historical facts, I felt free to imagine her in these spaces. And often they're the women's spaces.
Correct.
And private spaces, the bedrooms,
Yeah.
in the zanana, at a mehfil. So those are the places that I allowed my imagination.
Yeah.
free.
What was called the inner courtyard of
Yes.
women's lives.
Yes.
But even here, even in this novel, you spoke about the empty spaces. For instance, how Maharaja Ranjit Singh married Jindan is also a kind of an empty space where you fictionalize, because usual stories about Ranjit Singh marrying Jinda was that he sent his sword and he married her, etc. But you imagine, I mean, this is part of giving agency to Jinda, that you kind of fictionalize that episode and write that she fell in love with him, and it is she who wanted him rather than he wanting her. So once
Yes.
again, you are using that empty space to give to your imagination.
Right, because I wanted to understand, and I thought about it. Why would he want to marry a kennel keeper's daughter? He must have seen her, he must have admired her, and when is looking at her, admiring her, she is amazed by this Maharaja, this hero, the greatest hero of Punjab. And he is interested in me, she's thinking. And then I thought, of course she would fall in love with him. And then, therefore, the love story comes about. And then he does send her back. I think he is a man of great integrity. He says, I will marry you, but you have to be a certain age. You have to be 18. So now you go back to your village home. And when it is the right time, I will marry you. And because a lot of things are going on in the kingdom, he has to meet with the British, but he doesn't want to put off the wedding. He sends his sword. And then she gets married to the sword, and she comes to the zanana.
At this point, Chitra, I also wanted your take on this entire, if I can say, division between mythology and history, because I think that's one of the debates that is current now. That what is one person's mythology is another person's history. So this entire division, if I can say that, between what is mythology and what is history, is that something that you thought about?
Yes, because as I'm sure you know, the word for mythology in our language is itihas, right? I wouldn't say all mythology, but certainly the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, they are itihas. So there is a sense that, yes, this happened. Okay? Now, it happened a long time ago. It has been poetically expressed. So some of it certainly has been mythologized. Some of it certainly, the imagination of Vyas and the imagination of Krittivas beautifully they have created the stories. But there is a sense that deep down, it is a true history of ancient times. And the places they refer to, they're certainly real places. And even little hints that we find of what went on in those places, there are historical reminders of those even today, such as Kurukshetra. So I think there is a deep truth and there is a historical basis to the mythology. But what is amazing and wonderful about mythology, and we should look at it as one of its strengths, is that the way in which these stories have been told have made them relevant to the entire world, not only to us as Indians, that we grew up with these stories. And of course, we love these stories. And, Ram is special to us, Sita is special to us, Lord Krishna is special to us. His friendship with Draupadi is a very beautiful and special thing. But these are universal things. There are many universal lessons in our mythologies. History, of course, being much more recent, we can point to it, we see exactly how it came about. But here also, there is a lot of correcting that is necessary to be done, and we spoke about it because when the hunters were telling the story, it was a whole other story. And it's very important for us to reclaim Indian history, especially when Indian history was under the colonial powers, because truly those stories were twisted out of shape. So I think it is very important to correct that impression of history and also to learn from it. There is a big lesson in Jindan's story and Jinda's story, and how the British were able to destroy one kingdom after another. The kingdom, really, how did they do it? They came, there were just not that many of them, and they used us against each other, right? There's a big lesson there. I think it's very, very relevant even to today. If we don't come together, then we will fall apart.
Yeah, I mean, so many women. When I was kind of reading The Last Queen, it reminded me of so many similar stories. Kittur Chennamma, Rudrama Devi from Varangal, and Razia Sultan, and many of these, and of course, the famous Begum of Awadh.
Who actually appears in this book just a little bit. And Rani of Jhansi. How did they all get defeated?
Yeah.
Through the treachery of their own nobles. The British were able to turn people against each other by promising things.
But I think apart from, you were talking about correcting history, but is there also a danger of, what you said, poet's imagination, turning specific history into a universal mythology? That's where a kind of a poet's imagination comes. But do you think there is also a danger of treating mythological stories as real? I mean, is that a danger also? Because we are sometimes we know the current trend. We say that when we had plastic surgery and we had guided missiles and etc. etc. So is there a danger of correcting mythology also?
I think one should take mythology in the spirit in which it is written. Okay, it is the world of the Ramayana and the world of the Mahabharata. They are magical spaces. We have to understand that what is being referred to should be not taken necessarily as literal truth, but what is the heart of the message that is being given. In the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, the gods are always coming down and talking to the heroes, right? Now, are we going to take that as literal? Or perhaps is there a deeper mythical truth to it that yes, there is communication under certain circumstances, there is communication, meaningful communication between the human and the divine. And when we talk about the avatar stands right between the human and the divine, because we cannot emulate the divine directly. They come to teach us things about how to live our lives that cannot be taught by the gods, but that can be, they can be inspirations to humans. So we have to take things in the right spirit, I think. A literal interpretation is often not the best way to go.
Although Jindan's story is historical and our epics are mythological, but it's looked very striking to me that in a way 14 years in of separation of Jindan with her son, and then this living in exile, to me looked so much like epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Right?
Exactly, right? The story of the exile who then comes back, the mother who has been, separated from her child, that love. Actually, when I was writing Jinda's story and her her longing for her son. I was thinking about Sita in exile. I was thinking about it quite a lot. And that just like Sita, she dedicates her life to the welfare of her children. In many ways, Jinnah does that too.
And
So,
it reminded me of Yashoda, losing Krishna, as a young, child. And so I think although these are historical stories, it may be just a coincidence, but there is such a deep mythological structure, even to the story of Jinda.
yes.
Her escape from the prison, for instance, one of the dreaded prisons, one of the high security prisons, and how she disguises herself and ends up in Nepal of all the places. I mean, traveling
Walking.
across the country, right?
Walking. She walks all the way to Nepal. She has, at this point, almost no money. So she must have had to like beg on the road for even for food. But she manages. And what I love about that story is, so as you know, she's in Chinar
I know.
Fort under great difficulty. She's not being given proper food. She's not allowed exercise. Her maids have all been taken away from her, especially her favorite maid Mangala, who was really more of a friend than anything else, dragged away from her. And yet, somehow she manages. So, one of her followers manages to get in there. She exchanges clothes with this woman who came disguised as a seamstress. So now she's disguised as a seamstress and she leaves. But she doesn't just leave. She leaves this amazing, wonderful letter, which I just loved. So I absolutely put it in the novel, writing to the commander of the fort saying, "See, you were keeping me like this. You did everything you could to break my spirit, but I am gone. As though by magic, I have escaped." And I loved that spirit, that little,
I know.
I got you.
It's interesting that for a woman of her time, she wrote so many letters. And in a way, the letters actually become the best resource to understand her. And you have inserted
Yes.
some parts of her letters, as you just mentioned. Her very
Yes.
cheeky letter to the commander of the prison, and so you have inserted some of those letters in the novel. I mean,
Yes.
how did she write all these letters? I mean, was she educated? I mean, how did she manage this?
Yes. Well, I I have as so we don't know all the details, but we do know that by the time she gets married to Ranjit Singh, she is very close to him, and he himself was not educated,
Yeah.
formally educated. He was illiterate. Amazing for such a great ruler that he was able to rule this great kingdom. But he put a lot of emphasis on education, and so I think he encouraged Jinda to keep getting educated. And she would have been educated even in her village home, because at that time it would be, just so that she could read the Guru Granth, if nothing else. There would be a push to get her educated. So that's what I took. And then, then we do have the letters. So we know that by that time she is not only educated, she writes very strong letters. And she writes letters to the British. She writes letters to the Governor General. She says, "What are you doing? You are being unfair to me. You promised that you would, we would be your protectorate. And now you've annexed the kingdom. You've taken it away from my son. You promised me in writing that this is the amount of money I would be given every year. And I'm being given a very small percentage. And even that I'm not being given. They're keeping it from me. All my jewelry is gone. Well, why don't you just announce to everybody that you are the greatest thief of all, stealing this kingdom?" She wrote those letters. And what happened to them when they got to the British, we don't know. But because she had such, what shall I say, staunch followers, she was able to get them out to the Punjabi papers of the time. And so they get published in the Punjabi papers. And that's how I was able to access them.
I presume that she wrote in Punjabi?
She wrote in Punjabi, yes. But when she wrote it in Punjabi and she sent it to the British, all important documents. There were people, if they had wanted to, and I'm sure they translated it because they would have
Yes.
wanted to know what did she write. But once they translated it,
Hmm.
they would just not send
Yeah. Yeah.
onwards. However, one of the things that I found that was quite interesting, but also kind of heartbreaking, is British letters to each other, the high officials writing to each other about her, how
Hmm.
she was a real thorn in their flesh. They were like, we have to get rid of her. She is too strong. She is swaying public opinion. What shall we do? Oh, let's defame her character.
Hmm.
Let us show that she's an immoral woman, and then people will lose their respect for her. So they create this huge smear campaign. They actually call her the
Messalina.
Messalina of the Punjab, and they create this huge smear campaign. Now, this was problematic because, of course, they write all kinds of terrible things about her. But what I had to come to terms with is that she was also a feisty woman, and she did have a lover. And I do want to, I show it in the book because I want to give her real story. She has now been a widow for many, many years. She became a widow very young.
Yes.
She is lonely. And here is this man, Raja Lal Singh, in the court. He's very attracted to her, and she too.
Hmm.
So, I wanted to show that. But that was, a widow and one man. And according to the British, she was sleeping with everybody.
Yeah. It's so what should I say, familiar pattern in this kind of a smear campaigns against independent women. Just yesterday we had a session on the Hindi film actor Devika Rani and her life and how she ran the Bombay talkies, and men could not just bear this idea of this one woman running a studio, and she was just one woman in a board of 50 people, the rest of them being men. And she fell in love with Himanshu Roy, and then how she was maligned, etc. The whole story is so similar in terms of one, the character becomes the first target. uh,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, and in fact, in this book, Jinda, in The Last Queen, Jinda will say, look at all these other courtiers, look at all these other kings, including my husband, how many women they had, how
Mm.
many concubines, how many affairs. And here I just love one man, but I'm
Mm.
expected to remain lonely all my life.
Mm.
She asks that question.
Yeah. You mentioned, for instance, how the British wrote about her. Um, we of course know that how Muslims wrote about Ranjit Singh. From their point of view, in their histories, how Ranjit Singh is portrayed in a completely different color. Did you find any accounts of Muslim writers or Muslim historians writing about Jinda? Because if we look at Ranjit Singh's kingdom, 70% of them were Muslims. The population of the Sikh kingdom under Ranjit Singh was hardly 6 to 7% of Sikhs, and 70% of them were Muslims, right? So did you find any accounts of, because it's expected that the British would write in a very negative manner about Jinda, but did you find
Yeah.
any accounts of yeah.
I only found accounts of the time and accounts of the wars. There really wasn't much about her
Mm.
because, well, I don't know, I cannot guess why. But of all of those, I only found, yeah, the British writings about her, her own writings, and then, of course, the studies of the historians. Now, there are great, there's one by Shah Bahadur, right? And he is writing about the whole war, that whole first and second
Yeah, Anglo-Sikh
Anglo-Sikh
war.
wars. So that is there. And little mentions are made of Jinda. He's not very sympathetic to her. He's like, oh, she messed things up. here was this great kingdom that Ranjit Singh left, and by the time she finished with it, nothing was left. And that is, of course, not true. There were several kings in between, and by the time the kingdom came to Dalip and Jinda, her situation was difficult. She had a lot of things she was trying to balance. She was, the nobles, the noblemen were fighting among each other. The army was its own force and quite against the nobles. And she was trying to bring everything together. And in fact, the army was very positively, at least for a long time, for several years of her reign, they were very positive towards her. And actually, they were the force that kept her safe and kept the nobles from doing anything else. But at a certain point, everything started falling apart. So she is not a perfect queen, right? She understands to a great extent, but she is also driven by her own passions, not just her love passion, but her feelings for her brother, because her brother Jauhar is a big part of her life. And at a certain point, Jauhar is trouble, like from day one. When I was reading her story, I was like, oh, just send Jauhar back to the village. But she doesn't. She loves him. They have a bond from childhood. He's her only brother. And he gets more and more in trouble. And at a certain point, he will create a plot to kill one of Ranjit Singh's sons, who is trying to take over the kingdom.
Correct.
But to the army, any one of the royal family is sacred, cannot be killed. And when they find out that he killed them, then in revenge, they kill him in a very, it's a very, there are historical accounts of that,
Correct.
in a very bloody manner.
Correct.
And that Jindan cannot forgive. And she is like, you did this to my brother. I will bring you down from where you think you as the Khalsa army, you are so powerful, no one can stand against you. I'm going to bring you down. But I don't think she intends that they should lose the entire war. She just wants them to have some trouble. The reason they lose the war is, of course, because of the generals who defect, who really go over to them.
Yeah. I think my last two questions, one is very quickly, you talked about how Jinda was attached to, and she really lived all her life for her son. Because if we see the evolution of Jinda's character, from a kennel keeper's daughter to the Maharani, and then the last episode of because that is also the way in which you have structured the book, the girl, the bride, the queen, and the rebel, right? But I think her most mature evolution as a character was through her motherhood.
Definitely. And in fact, not only when Dalip is little, but after they're reunited and she is ill, and the last thing she wants is to go live in England with the hated British, right, who have done all these terrible things to her. But she sees what they have done to her son. They have made him lose all sense of himself. He has lost the dignity of being the last king of Punjab. He's become like a toy of Queen Victoria, lost his religion, lost all his money. They haven't even told him how they have just confiscated all his private wealth. And she says, I'm going to at least give him back a sense of himself, who he was. And that is her final project. And I think she really succeeds in that, because after her death, he will go back, he will reconvert and become a Sikh again. And the rest of his life, he will fight the British, trying to get back his kingdom, get back some kind of autonomy, get an apology. Nothing happens. But he tries, and that itself is a victory. Right?
Yeah, I think it's such a tragic story of a woman who didn't want to be in a Firangi prison, didn't want to live in a Firangi country, and but her last wish, to be buried in the same grave as Ranjit Singh, could not be accomplished because the British did not allow the ashes to be taken, and the ashes had to be buried somewhere close to in Nashik,
Yeah,
close to Bombay.
yeah.
Even
They
that
would
last.
not let her son go back to Punjab because they were afraid there would be an uprising. He was still very powerful. His cousins were, the Sandhawalias, they were very strong and they wanted him to come back, so the British wouldn't. In fact, I mean, after she died, it took them a long time to even allow the body to be brought. So she was actually interred for a while in
Yes.
England, and then he was able to bring the body and at least give it the
Yeah.
last rites. But I think there is a happy ending, although not in this book, because this book will end with that,
Correct.
with that scene of him bringing back her body and having her cremated. But her
Correct.
granddaughter will come and she will
Yeah.
take her ashes and put it in Ranjit Singh's samadhi. So that is the thing. But
Yeah.
I wanted to say, although this is tragic, I think she wins a victory. She wins a moral victory by being able to show her son the truth,
Correct.
right? So that he's not just a duped, he's not just made a fool of by the British, so that he doesn't think, oh, these wonderful British, what a great culture. She tells him the truth. And there's a lot of power. When we know the truth of ourselves, that's a lot of power. That's a victory right there.
One quick response. I know Ajay is here with audience questions, but one quick question is, how did the Sikh historians or Punjabi historians or just Punjabi people respond to this story? I mean, in your writing.
This book?
Yes.
You mean this book? Well,
Yes.
it's very new. So far, so good. I think we'll have to wait and see. My hope is that it will be positive because I have tried at once to be truthful and positive because I really admire Jinda's character and her life. And how she is out of tragedy, she carves out a victory, her spirit. I think there's so much to be learned from her spirit. And that's why I'm very excited that this is going to become a movie because it would be great to see that on the screen as well in a different medium. So,
there's already a
fingers
movie.
crossed.
Yeah, there's
Fingers
already a
crossed.
movie, right?
There was a movie about her son,
Correct.
right? The
Singh.
Black Prince.
Correct.
And she
Figures in that.
She figures in that
Correct.
as a little part of the story, but she dies pretty early in that.
Right. Thank you so much, Chitra, for this
Chitra,
conversation.
this
I'm
was
sure.
very, very fascinating.
Thank you so much, and I'm sure the
Totally,
audience have questions.
I totally enjoyed listening to this. The kind of feedback we have from our audience is so positive. I was surprised to see so many people who have read your books, admire you, and coming back to listen to today's conversation. There were two questions. I thought I'll pass them on to you. One question was, to what extent a writer has to self-censor or be careful while writing in the age of trolling, etc.?
That's a great question, and it's a difficult question, right?
Yeah.
So I feel that a writer, we have to be truthful. We have to be truthful to our vision. Otherwise, why are we even writing? Why are we putting our heart and soul into creating a work which we hope is of art? It's a work of art. It is a work that hopefully will, touch the lives of people, maybe even last for some time. Those are the hopes. And in order for a piece of work to be powerful, it has to be honest and the writer has to care about it. I think that really comes across. Certainly as a reader, I can tell when I'm reading something that the writer believes in and cares about. So I think that is number one. Will people like it? That's not in my hands, right? That's not in my hands. Am I worried? Every time a book comes out, I'm worried. When I was writing Palace of Illusions, I was worried. When I was writing Forest of Enchantments, I was very worried. Will people accept my portrayal of Mother Sita? Will they see that it's done with love and respect while showing her in her humanness with her faults. Same with Jinda. With great respect, I have created her character, but I want it to be real. I don't want to gloss over her faults. That is
Fair
part
enough.
of who she is.
Perfect. Perfect. Uma Sridhar is asking that I wonder how she escaped being arrested by the British in Nepal.
You know, the reason she was able to manage in Nepal is because the Nepal regent, the, the prime minister of Nepal, he was very strong. He was a very strong person. And when she got there, he was not so pro British. He became more pro British over the years. And the British were very tricky. They said, please come to England and meet the Queen. The Queen really wants to meet you. So once he went and he met the Queen, he was his attitude changed, and he was no longer so friendly to Jindal. But he had given her word that he would take care of her, and he kept that word. And that was partly because many years back, Maharaja Ranjit Singh had helped the soldiers of Nepal in a war, and they remembered that he came and fought next to our soldiers. So, you know, there was a code of honor, and he kept to that code of honor. Although towards the end, they were not on good terms.
One more question is, how could she send the letters when she was watched by the British?
She was very clever. So she had a whole network of spies, and they were very, very, very loyal to her. So, you know, they would come as though they were the cleaner of the house, or even in the fortress, like a seamstress that just come to repair some of her clothes. So they would come like that. Often many of them were women. So they could come into into her room and all of that. And through them, she managed to send out letters, sometimes she was able to, like, what little jewelry she had, sometimes she sent them to her supporters, things like that.
Anyway,
Very resourceful.
the questions show how involved and engaged the audience is. So
Great audience questions. I love these
this was
questions.
wonderful. I just want to inform my audience that we have some exciting things happening today. There is a stick puppets show that's happening right now on YouTube from 10:30 onwards. So some of you may want to go and join in. At 2 o'clock, we have a discussion of a movie called Tongue Untied, the story of Daphne by Gautam Pemaraju on YouTube again. And at 11 o'clock here, we have N.K. Singh in conversation on his new book. And the title of the session is Portraits of Power. We have a whole lot of other interesting things happening, as you will hear them over the next few hours. Today is going to be an exciting day. Ladies and gentlemen, do join in. And thank you, Chitra, once again. Thank you, Vijay.
Thank you, Chitra.
Thank you.
Thank you so much that you have been
Lovely
able to.
questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
And thanks to the whole audience for
Thank
listening
you.
so carefully.
Thank you. Probably, Ajay, you have to announce that our viewers should refresh so that they see other programs also.
Ladies and gentlemen, in case you are not able to view any session of HLF, just go to YouTube/HLF-India and refresh it, and you will be able to see the live events that are there. So just don't miss out because of technical reason that YouTube makes us do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chitra. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
And
Thank you so much
finally meeting you.
Yes,
even if it is virtually. Thank you so much.
Yes, it's lovely to take part in this festival.
Thank you.
Thank you.
పూసి కాసిందే కోలు
పున్నాము వెన్నెల కోలు పూసి కాసిందే కోలు
నీరు నిమ్మల కింద గన్నెర్ల కింద వంగి పూలే రంగ కొంగందు